As a follow-up to Sweeping It Under the Rug, the Saugus Wheelabrator Ash Dilemma, the title of this documentary is Clearing the Air, Wheelabrator's Counter.
On September 3rd, 2015, representatives of Wheelabrator gathered together to give us a tour of the ash landfill facility and to hear Wheelabrator's side of the story, clarifying unfounded claims that they saw in the first video.
Unfounded claims. The film incorrectly displayed the Dewey Daggett landfill as the Wheelabrator Saugus ash landfill.
Claims that ash is toxic are unfounded.
Claims that ash was spread in the marsh are untrue.
Claims that the facility does not have groundwater protection are unfounded.
Wheelabrator has absolutely nothing to do with expensive flood insurance for residents.
Claims that Wheelabrator could walk away from responsibility for the site after 30 years and that the site would become the town's responsibility are unfounded.
Claims that operations of the landfill have contributed to negative health impacts in surrounding communities are unfounded. Individuals that were in attendance were Dan Musial, General Manager of Wheelabrator Facilities.
David Tooley, Vice President of Public Policy and Communications. Alex Rittershaws, Legislative Director of Committee on Energy. Ricky Serino, State Representative's Legislative Aide.
State Representative Rosalie Vincent.
Maureen Glenn, Lobbyist at Wheelabrator and Attorney at Murphy Donahue.
Charlie French, Professor at the University of New Hampshire.
Mark Grady, Wheelabrator Saugus Environmental Manager.
Matt Hughes, Regional Environmental Manager.
And Jim Connolly, Vice President of Environmental Health and Safety.
The project was really to have them do an analysis of this particular issue, a stake around that issue. How are decisions made? What are some alternative policies that could address any of the challenges around it? Part of the project was to do a 10-minute online presentation of the project, and the one that your group chose was around the Wheelabrator.
So the plant is here because DEP, then the DEQE and the Department of Public Health wanted to put an end to the uncontrolled trash disposal here. And so they asked the owner to seek an alternative. The alternative is this technology that they found in Europe, the waste energy process that was put here. And then the ash originally was, like I said, it was stockpiled here. And then they decided they would spread that material as cover over the trash. So originally the material was stored here, then it was used to cover the MSW. Then in the consent order, DEP wanted a closure date of 1996. We went through the, like I said, the rigorous review, but it was about the same time as the consent order, 1989, 1990, that this was, the ACEC was designated. So that was in place when DEP did the review of this equivalency system. Then later on, 1994, 1995, we went through a NEPA process, a full environmental impact review process regarding the future use of the site. We were able to demonstrate that this system worked. We had a few years of operational data then, and that this could continue to be used to deposit ash. And at that time, the DEP said until you meet the contours of the plan that was approved then.
So where was it stockpiled before it was put on the landfill? Or was it
well, no, it was stockpiled here. This was the old D'Amadio landfill, this footprint here. And the ash was stockpiled here. The Dewey Daggett landfill, since you brought that up.
Right.
The Dewey Daggett landfill, he was a competitor of Martin D'Amadio. And he brought in trash and industrial waste and commercial waste. And in about 1985, DEP and EPA started investigating this. He operated from 1949 to about 1969, as best we can tell from air photos and things. There's no controls here. No cap on this was ever put in place. There's no liner. There's no leachate collection. The Pines River is eroding into this bank, and there's exposed waste there. For 20 years, this has been investigated. The Daggett Family Trust, who owns the site, is gone. It doesn't exist as an entity. The only asset they have is this uncontrolled landfill.
What is the typical lifespan? The other two plants I read in.
Putnam and Shrewsbury?
Yes.
Well, they're confined by property limits, really. And we maximize the amount of ash, like at the Shrewsbury site, we maximize the airspace based on footprint. That hasn't been done here. here has not been about maximizing the ash volume on site. Our pumping facility, we've been there for 16 years of operations. There's probably another 30 to 40 to go, easily.
What is the height of the ash landfills in Shrewsbury and
From the surrounding grade, 150 feet vertical.
It's another claim we just have to address. There's people who claim that we spread ash in the marsh. That was never done here. The ash has always been placed on the footprint of where waste had previously been placed.
which is in the marsh? Side of the marsh? The previous landfill is in the marsh.
The previous landfill was in the marsh. When we got here and started placing ash, the marsh was no longer the marsh, it was upland. How do you keep this waste that was previously deposited, plus the waste that we're continuing to deposit, isolated from the environment? That's the objective of the landfill. The word slurry wall is interesting. We call it that because that's the method that was used to construct it. So when you're digging a deep trench, 30 to 60 feet deep, you got to keep that trench open until you backfill it.
So they put clay
So you mix
put
clay,
cement.
clay, water, slurry, like holds the sides of the trench open. Deep excavators go on this way, digging the trench. Slurry's keeping the trench full so it won't collapse. And then at the back end, a mixture of soil and clay. The wall itself is not slurry today. It's
Concrete.
no, it's not concrete. It's a soil clay mixture that meets that 1 times 10 to the minus 7.
How thick is the wall?
It's anywhere from 5 feet thick to 20 feet thick.
You have to follow to make sure that we were in fact tying into the natural clay, and that the mixture of soil and clay that we were backfilling with was going to meet the permeability standard.
What year was this slurry wall
This
implemented?
1990 to 92.
How deep does the wall go?
It's about 30 to 60 feet for the most part.
So basically, the slurry wall is meant to contain what was already there previously.
Correct.
Because the ash is on top of that, so that
Correct.
is what goes up above sea level, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what is done to contain the sides of that? It's covered once every 7 days.
When we're done placing the ash and we reach the peak elevation, we put this cap system on, this permanent cap. In the meantime, there's what we call daily cover, which is what's placed on the 7-day schedule. Then there's an intermediate cover if an area is going to be needed again later.
So you do daily cover? It's
Well,
daily
no,
or every 7 days?
It's every 7 days we place cover over the ash.
Is this the only, quote, unlined ash facility still up and running? Because that's what my records show.
Yeah, well, it's not an unlined
Well, that
landfill.
DEP classifies it as such.
I'm not aware of that.
I have it,
Okay.
I have DEP classifies it as an unlined.
Okay.
And all the other unlined have been closed or capped.
Yeah, because we have a permit from DEP that tells us that this
Oh.
meets their,
In this particular site, you're using the slurry wall as compared to the liner. If you were researching now, knowing what you know now, would this be an ideal site for a landfill?
that's kind of an unfair question, because this site chose us, essentially. It was the
But
process.
knowing what you know now.
It was the process of trying to close the old DiMatteo landfill, that they needed another technology, and they went out and they sought the technology and found what became Wheelabrator. The site conditions here are ideal for this solution. We have that natural underlying clay layer. If we didn't have that, we couldn't have gone forward with this solution. So this solution works for this site. We went through this whole process with DEP. We went through the rigorous review. We went through the rigorous QA process in installing this system. And we have a permit that confirms that we meet the standards. If you can satisfy the DEP that you meet the equivalent groundwater protection of that more standard system.
So this, if you came to the DEP right now with this proposal, this would be allowed by DEP's regulations current?
We believe it would, under that alternative groundwater protection system section.
Would you agree that initially this plant would be considered an incinerator in
No.
1975?
No, so this plant was
You
the
don't
first.
consider it an
No,
incinerator?
this plant was the first application of this modern waste-to-energy process in the United States, the first successful commercial application of that. Since this plant's inception, it has those combustion controls, it has the grade systems, and it has air emission control equipment. Back in 1989, 1990, people used the word incinerate to describe our process. And incinerate is a word that is used to describe a process that really isn't done anymore. Incinerate is just the burning trash in very poorly controlled conditions. What we do is a modern industrial boiler. We have very controlled combustion conditions. We have advanced air emission control equipment and very detailed process control. So municipal waste combustion has come a long way since incineration back in the 50s and 60s. So the air emission control equipment, the dust that's collected on the fabric filter bags, any of the lime or other particulate that falls out of the spray dryer absorber, and then in the boiler itself, there are tubes where the steam is generated and heated, and they are wrapped or shaken, and any material that adheres to those tubes falls down. So it's those materials which are typically called fly ash. Bottom ash is material that is unburned when it comes off the end of the grating. Throughout Europe, the ash residue is used as a construction aggregate and has been for really for a long time.
Is that the combination? Do they use the combination of the fly ash and the bottom ash?
In Europe, they keep it
Or
separate. In the U.S., the combined ash in Florida has been approved for road-based material. In Europe, they keep the ash stream separate.
Or contains more toxins than the bottom ash, is that correct?
You wouldn't reuse it the same way you would a bottom ash, correct?
But here it's okay to mix
yes, in
the
the
fly
US,
ash and the bottom ash?
Yeah, in the U.S., the practice has been to combine the ash. That's been done. And then that combined material that's generated is tested by this EPA toxicity test. And the combined material is non-toxic.
Was it always
So
combined?
Yes, yes, it's always been combined in the US. Pennsylvania, in New York, in Florida, where the ash residue is used to cover municipal solid waste. So it replaces ordinary dirt and is that cover material. Here at Saugus, the ash itself is required to be covered every 7 days.
7-day cover or operational cover, and that's usually the word I like to use. So the working phase itself, that ash gets covered by the ash that comes the next day. So what we're covering, you could cover, the way I think about it is, no ash is exposed for longer than 7 days. So the top of that lift that you went over, we cover more than every 7 days. You know, it gets covered pretty much as we progress. You understand? So we could apply it daily.
It's covered by the ash.
Right, so think about it as ash is not exposed for longer than 7 days. It's not covered every 7 days. We could cover ash every single day, but that front face of ash gets covered by the ash that comes on the next day. But we run 24 hours a day too, so the ash is coming in 1 truck an hour.
At what point did they determine what kind of testing would be completed on the ash?
An earlier test called EP-Tox. Ash is tested to determine whether it's hazardous or toxic or not. When the EPA first started the requirement in the 1970s, it was a test called EP-Tox, and it's designed to simulate the conditions of if you take a material and you place it in a landfill with regular trash, regular municipal solid waste, and it's uncovered. As the rain falls on that, the trash decomposes, it generates organic acids. And those organic acids would liberate things in that waste. And then you look at that extract to see are the materials that are liberated in those conditions such that it could cause environmental harm. So the test, the EP-Tox test, the first test was EPA's first effort at creating a test that within a 24-hour period you can simulate what's going to leach out over the long term if it's disposed of in a landfill.
Was it a test in a controlled environment, or was it an actual test on the site?
It's a laboratory test. So you take the material, you subject it to certain organic acids in certain concentrations, you tumble that for 18 hours, you take the extract and filter it, and you see what the metals are. EPA made improvements to that test when they went from EP-Tox to this TCLP test. Again, we've been subject to testing on that for some time and routinely pass.
How frequently is it done?
We do it at least every 9 months.
Unannounced, they show up and say, hey, we're here to check you guys.
On the treated, right, whatever the discharge is to them, not the raw leachate, but it's very clear.
Right, and again, we operate several other landfills as well that are strictly ash monofill type facilities. And we have, again, regular testing of leachate wastewater. And so I think as a history of a company, we could determine, you know, going back and looking at all the sites, okay, is there any problem anywhere? If you saw a problem in one location, you can extrapolate that to the other locations as well.
We need to deposit the ash material within a designated active area. We need to manage the water or stormwater that runs off from that active area, so it's captured and goes into the landfill system rather than running off. They are concerned about whether we generate any dust or air emissions, and observe that the ash is adequately moist and is covered before it dries out so that it could become airborne. And then there are procedural things that they check on in terms of are we doing our own inspections of the stormwater system? Are the vegetated areas taking? Is there any damage to the stormwater management system or other systems that are observable?
So do they generally observe, or do they actually test for different levels of anything in the air? So you say that it doesn't have dust, but does it make the air quality tested at that point?
There are no air quality test requirements for landfills. Okay. 1989, 1990, there was a significant improvement in the air emission control equipment on this plant. It used to have what's called an electrostatic precipitator as the sole control. And in 1989, 1990, we added a scrubber, which uses a lime slurry and temperature control to control for air emission parameters. We add carbon to help control for metals, for other certain organics which may get through the combustion process. And we add urea to the boiler itself to help control for NOx, nitrogen oxides.
The scrubbers were available, but they weren't put in, so I just was curious why it was sort of forced hand to have that happen versus just putting them in. The technology is available.
Again, I'm not fully aware of the details of the state of technology in the early 1970s and what was available. Yeah. But EPA forces best available control technology on a plant. Right. So what was best available control technology in 1975 changed very differently between 1975 and the late 1980s when the legislature passed the bill and the new air emission control equipment was put on here.
But DEP didn't mandate that you do it. It was done by state mandate.
Mm-hmm. So the system was put in 1992. The plant opened in 1975.
Correct.
So from the period of 1975 up to 1992, what sort of controls were kept?
Yeah, there were different requirements and regulations at the time.
Can you speak to those?
Yeah, the landfill requirements for liners and for capping really came about through the federal RECRA program, which delegated it to the states. So all that came about in the 1980s. When this plant went online, this was a large, completely uncontained trash landfill. And the ash was originally stockpiled, and then DEP approved spreading the ash on top of the trash as a means to cover that trash, because a lot of the trash had not been covered. It was then, when the standards improved in the 1980s, that we worked with the DEP and through a consent order process, obtained approval to install this system to protect the environment. There's several layers of inspection. Our own PE who we hire generates a report that goes to DEP.
Right. And the Board of Health.
And everything gets copied. Anything we send to DEP goes to the Board of Health. The Board of Health's engineer participates either with our engineer or does their own inspection and reports to the Board of Health. DEP personnel come out and do inspections, and we don't necessarily get a report. If there were any violations, they would write up violations, and we don't have any violations from the DEP.
Because there was a point, I think it was in 1970, that DEP said that you were only going to store the ash and test it, and it wasn't meant to be considered a landfill. Mm-hmm. It wasn't meant to be permanent at that time.
There was,
speak to that at all?
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on the history,
right.
But there's a whole kind of progression here in terms of the approvals and what information was available and how that came about.
You mentioned here phase one. That was on top of, correct me, which particular landfill? The DiMatteo landfill?
Right.
Okay.
Our whole perimeter.
And there was no, at that time, there were no environmental controls. Is that right? From 1975 to 1992?
Correct. The overall alkalinity of the total ash mass that controls and keeps things from being leached out. Lime is a significant part of that alkalinity.
So over time, with exposure to the elements, would the lime wash away and then allow emissions
Yeah,
of
no.
any other substance that would be contained in the ash?
Because of the way it's mixed, the line doesn't wash away. It all kind of sets up together. And we have data from testing the leachate. Let me describe the environmental control of the landfill, and we can talk about that. We test the leachate, the liquid that's coming out of the landfill on a regular basis.
Is that every 9 months?
Every
That
quarter.
test, or is that?
Once a quarter.
Once a quarter.
On the top of the existing fill, and it's only covered weekly. What happens if it's not covered daily?
Yeah, so
And
we don't.
why isn't
Yeah,
it
we don't
covered?
place fly ash separately. Within the process in our plant, all the ash is combined. into combined ash.
So it's combined before it gets put,
Before it gets in the truck that's going to drive up to the
so
landfill.
you combine it. So
And there's some interesting things, and we'll see it firsthand. Right? So the ash that comes off the bottom of the grate goes into a quench pit. It's a big water bath that forms a seal at the bottom of the boiler. That quench pit puts out the fire or any smoldering embers that are still in that. There's a drag chain that runs through that trench and brings the ash up a conveyor. All of the fly ash, which includes a significant amount of lime, we add a lime slurry for air emission control purposes. And the lime has some interesting properties. When that lime combines with the wet bottom ash, it's mixed in the process. So you have the fly ash, which consists of a lot of lime, with the wet bottom ash. And that material itself goes into the truck in a very wet condition. It looks like wet cement. That's brought out to the landfill and dumped.
if high winds and rain come, they cannot blow that into the environment or into,
30–40% moisture content with the ash. It's not dry and dusty as I think a lot of people think it is.
Thing to note is the nature of the material, the ash residue that we produce. Often people refer to it as toxic ash, and you'll hear that phrase, toxic ash. And it's important to note that the material is not toxic. EPA has a very specific test and definition of what makes a waste toxic. The test that they follow is called the Toxicity Characteristic Leaching Procedure, or TCLP. And we regularly test our ash by that procedure here at Saugus and throughout our fleet. And we have not failed that test. Our ash is not toxic.
It's been posted on Facebook that recently there have been tests that haven't passed, and testing has been stepped up at a different frequency than normal. Can you talk about when that happens and what the reaction plan is to that?
Yeah, so if you get an anomaly on a test, something, you have a long pattern of testing at one level, and you get an anomaly that's at a different level, you want to figure out what's going on. So one of the first things you do to figure out what's going on is get another test as soon as possible. Is that a blip, or is there some change in conditions? And then you want to look at all the operations, depending on what the test is, what might contribute, what factors might contribute to that.
So is this
Do a
true,
thorough
that
investigation.
recently there was an anomaly in the test?
Yes.
Can you talk about that particular anomaly?
I'm not going to talk about it because we're still in the midst of doing the evaluation. We're still in the midst of trying to get all the data together, do all the statistics on the data, and determine when it is.
But that will be available?
Yes. Once we have a due date of sometime in late September of a report to the DEP. All of our reports that we send to DEP go to the Board of Health as well, and become public information that way. So, and I'm sure that the Board of Health will, as always, with every report we submit.
Now we're going to take a look at the case of Claremont, New Hampshire. The Wheelabrator Incinerator in Claremont is the city's largest stationary source of air pollution. In 2006, 35 local healthcare professionals called for the closure of the incinerator, citing unacceptable and unnecessary health risks for the area residents. According to DES Emissions Summary and Emissions Fee Summary, the Claremont Incinerator emitted 228.75 tons of airborne pollutant in 2010, for which the company paid DES almost $34,000 in emission fees. DES receives money as pollution increases. Air emissions are likely higher than what DES record shows, since there are many unidentified compounds in the incinerator emissions. The nature of waste is continually changing, as is the chemical nature of incinerator emissions. Wheelabrator reported emissions of particulate matter, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, non-methane volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide, and toxic air pollutants. A 2008 DES fact sheet states toxic air pollutants include dioxins, benzene, arsenic, beryllium, mercury, vinyl chloride, asbestos, and polychlorinated biphenyls. Reports that Wheelabrator has submitted to DES indicate that the incinerator has exceeded the emission limit for carbon monoxide on at least 443 occasions from 1987 through June 2011. DES issued administrative orders to Wheelabrator in 1989 and 1990 regarding excess carbon monoxide emissions, and on July 21, 2010 issued a notice of past violation for carbon monoxide concentration deviations that occurred the previous year. Despite the history, the director of the New Hampshire Air Resources Division stated in 2004 that EPA determined the percentage of carbon monoxide exceedances was within the acceptable range allowed by EPA. Mercury, dioxin, and other persistent toxic substances have received considerable attention because the incinerator emits these toxic chemicals into the air over Claremont every day. Persistent toxic substances accumulate in our air, water, and soil. They also accumulate in the human body, resulting in what is commonly called chemical body burden. Chemical residues can be found in the blood, urine, and breast milk. The prestigious International Joint Commission stated in its 7th biennial report, persistent toxic substances are too dangerous to the biosphere and to humans to permit their release in any quantity. Claremont's Wheelabrator facility closed on September 30th, 2013.
When we did the tour, I know that you showed us the composting facility. Is that the only soil that you used to cover? Because I also heard in the Board of Health meeting, I believe it was over the summer, about this Comm 97, which is contaminated soil that you use to cover the ash, which would be done, I believe, on a 7-day basis. So why would you use contaminated soil? And would that soil have a different interaction with the ash?
The soils we use for cover include material that comes through the Comm 97 process. The Comm 97, that's a DEP process to evaluate soils from construction sites. It's non-hazardous soil, but it's soil that you wouldn't use in a playground, for example. DEP wants to encourage the use of those soils in landfill operations rather than in operations that are outside of areas with groundwater control.
What it comes from is 1997, the Mass DEP came up with a set of guidelines, a standard for all contractors in the entire state to follow, and it was really based on urban construction projects. Because before that, you'd have large high-rises going in Boston that they would excavate into the ground, and contractors could do whatever they wanted with the materials for the most part. They could go anywhere. And so the state wanted to come up with some type of policy that made it, environmentally friendly, environmentally protective, but also set up a level playing ground for companies that were trying to do it right with those that maybe weren't. And so we've been following that ever since. So most of the soils that we would get in here for those types of purposes come from Boston projects, from urban development, from within this area, including the Walmart project, the Lowe's project here in Saugus. It's similar materials to what the town of Saugus brought in for capping of their own landfill back in the late 90s, early 2000, brought in about 400,000 tons of the same materials, capping their own project.
There's a pretty extensive evaluation that goes on with each project, each set of soil that we want to approve. We have to get testing from the people who are doing the construction project. We do some of our own testing. We present the information to both DEP and the Saugus Board of Health before approving the material to come on site and be used as concrete.
If in 20 years from now they dig up the middle of this ash, would that be contaminated waste or hazardous?
I don't think it would be either. If they dug it up, the ash that's been deposited?
Yeah, they went through that, the middle of that pile and said, okay, well, we want to knock it down, we need to burn it somewhere. Where would they have to burn it?
It wouldn't be hazardous. It would be hard. It would be jackhammering.
Like it's concrete.
In there, right up about Comm 97, that it is, it's soil from a construction site. It's unknown. There's tests that are done to say that there are certain levels. But, I mean, it is a community's concern to say, well, what is actually in there? And it's hard to believe that running the water through at the plant, which I understand you're completely in compliance. I'm not suggesting that you're not in any way, just to be clear on that. I'm just saying that it is a concern of the community to say, well, if everybody is so sure that there's nothing in it, run a test and just say, yeah, we did a test, it's been there for 10 years, and you can't find anything in the soil that would be damaging to your health or anyone else in the community. We spoke briefly on a side note saying, you know, the community and understanding what's being done in this plant, because it's hard to understand what's going on.
So off to the left, as we're driving around, you'll see the nature trail, and that's area that never had ash put on it. There was municipal solid waste put out there, and Phragmites, these invasive species, had really taken over. So as part of the nature trail development, we dug all that back and got that inside the barrier wall, and have put down a clay layer to inhibit those invasive species from coming back, and gone in and planted what were originally native species to this area. So it's a transition from the salt marsh to uplands. And there are a whole series of different mini ecosystems around the perimeter that you'll see off to the left-hand side on this tour. As we're driving on the road goes over the barrier wall for the most part. We'll stop at a couple places where you can see these piezometers, where we measure the level of water in the inside and outside the barrier wall. And it's between those piezometers, the big concrete collars around them, that the barrier wall goes. So it's typically to the left of the road. Sometimes it's right up close to the road. You'll also see brown steel pipes off to the right. Those are cleanouts in this leachate collection system. So to keep that from getting clogged, we build these cleanouts every few hundred feet, so we can go down and jet those out, keep the water flowing smoothly through those. If you look up to the right, you'll see a slope going up, the grass slope. That's on top of the cap. So there's a membrane cap. We'll go to the bottom. There's the natural soils, the peat soils that were here before anybody got here. As waste was placed, sometimes they dug down into the peat, sometimes they just put it on top. It's really hard to tell, and built up the municipal solid waste there. Ash has been placed over that waste for the most part. So when you're looking at the hill to the right, you're seeing our liner system on top of ash, which is on top of other waste. As you look up the slope, you'll see a little drainage swale built up into that system. You don't want the water running downhill for long periods, picking up velocity and eroding the cap. This circles the site and brings the water back to a stormwater detention feature, which we'll show you on the other side. And then you'll see gas vents. This one's depicted here at the top. Sometimes they're halfway up the slope. Because there is municipal solid waste in there, when we first built the landfill, we put these in case there was any continued decomposition. A lot of this trash had been here a long time and was fully decomposed. But we put these gas vents in here to allow any gas out that may come up so it wouldn't disturb the cap. And we found that there's really very, very little gas generation. This municipal solid waste is really fully decomposed.
Would normally say that, well, we're not going to fight it, we're just going to settle. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So what happened is there were a series of allegations raised against Wheelabrator at this facility here and our 2 other facilities in Massachusetts. They were investigated by the Attorney General's office and by the DEP.
What were the allegations? Just to be clear.
Yeah, there were a number about water being released into the stormwater system, about a hole in the roof of the ash building emitting ash to the environment, the way certain other waste streams were managed within the facilities. And they came to certain conclusions that we disagreed with. We're confident that we were operating in compliance and that some of the allegations were untrue, but rather than to continue to have a long, ongoing legal battle, which could have cost years and a great deal of money, the company chose to settle for the $7.5 million. And the $7.5 million included a number of things. There were payments to towns that were the customers. There was payment of a fine, and there was payment of monies for supplemental environmental projects in communities that were where our facilities are located. So one of the projects here in Saugus was to help fund the town's CHARM Center. That's the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials at the Old Town Dock. The other thing that the settlement included was a series of audits, where we agreed to be subject to an extremely rigorous series of audits by a third-party auditor that was selected by DEP and the Attorney General's office. It's a company called Environ, they're a professional environmental audit firm. And they came in unannounced once a quarter for 3 years at each of our facilities. And they gave us the most intensive audit we've ever had, looking for the most nitpicky details on inspection forms, observing us doing our ash testing, observing us doing water testing, just walking around and observing operations and how we manage different waste. At the end of the audit program, we had a meeting with Environ and DEP. They talked about our commitment to compliance. There were 0 findings at the facilities by the end of that program, and we're very proud of our accomplishment. And really, they helped us along to where we're operating at a level of attention to detail and compliance that no one else in the industry is really achieving. That we could walk away from the site after 30 years. I'm not sure exactly where that came from. I know the DEP regulations have what's called a post-closure period. It's designed to be 30 years. And that comes from municipal solid waste landfills. So when trash is put into the closed environment of a landfill, it decomposes. And it's about a 30-year cycle for that decomposition to be complete. That's when it's generating methane. That's when it's generating leachate that has the most material in it and generates the odor. So during that period, there's specific monitoring and reporting that's required. The regulation that describes that 30-year period is very specific and says that, at the end of this 30 period, that no way absolves the owner from any future liability. So under the DEP solid waste regulations, we have the perpetual liability for any environmental issues at that site.
So is there funding put aside for this long-term plan in the event of the Dewey Daggett landfill that the company is not viable at that time?
So Dewey Daggett existed in the 60s, which is probably a site that made those regulations come into effect because there weren't any sureties and things like that. It's a bond that you pay for each year, but it basically covers the cost to cap any areas of a site that are not capped at that time, plus it gives the funding for that 30 years of post-closure maintenance and care.
And what about after that 30 years?
There's no regulations beyond that at this point.
So you could walk away after the 30 years?
Well, we'd still be the owner, we'd still be responsible under federal regulations.
If you were still the owner of the property?
Right. If
You're
else,
assuming that you
if somebody else,
somebody's the owner.
If somebody else
That's X
buys
amount
it,
of years from now,
they buy the perpetual liability. And under federal rules, they could come back and go after previous owners as well.
So this is not leased land like in some of the other landfill sites. You actually own this whole property.
Correct.
Is it true that before the scrubbers were put in, a lot of the elements of the fly ash were airborne?
I'm not familiar with the details pre-1989, but obviously with the improvements in air emission control equipment, we see there are great improvements. So the technology advancement from 1975, from when this was first built, to the advancements that had been generated through the Clean Air Act, which was passed in the early 1970s, and the regulations added, the technology was greatly improved and then added here.
Didn't the state legislature mandate that the scrubbers be put in?
Yes.
But DEP didn't mandate that you do it. It was done by state mandate.
Mm-hmm.
Working as a staffer, over 25 years ago, we were getting calls from people who live in East Saugus whose homes were covered with ash. Before the scrubbers were put in, every bit of their property, they had to actually have people come and wash down their home. So maybe those people, they're not saying that it's a fact, but they may have had some toxics that permeated their home, their lungs. They may have reason to believe or be skeptical of the plant today.
Yeah.
Because I saw ash this thick on people's homes.
I'm not going to deny what happened
Right, so that's why
years and years ago, but I
the
can say,
correlation, that's why they're nervous. So they could have had some health issues from the plant.
if that were the case, right, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health has a program where they evaluate community health impacts.
Wouldn't you think that a facility like this would be looking to put the most extensive liners? It goes into the Saugus River, it goes into the Pines River, and in turn goes into America's first public beach, where I live.
Sure.
I'm concerned in 30 years where all of this is going to go.
The leachate testing is certain. You run the water through, you do the testing on the water that runs through the particular ash. It's done at the plant, not after it's in the landfill, correct?
The ash as it's generated is tested. And it's tested, we do some quality control testing of our own in the plant, but the actual tests that the agencies rely on are done by state certified labs. So we prepare a sample and give it to the lab, and they do the testing.
Right. The ash, once it's in the landfill, and I understand that it's not required, which is why you don't do it, but the ash is never tested or never been tested. Why can a test be done to prove that there isn't? It's a concern of the community that the test is not done.
Yeah, the ash is tested before it's put in, and then it's isolated and sits there, so I don't know how it would change.
It wouldn't
But can the environmental factors that it's exposed to outside of the plant after the initial burn and the way that it combines with this contaminated soil that's produced in a lab, it's under a controlled environment. When that material is exposed to the environment, the actual real environment, would it be the same test? You can't answer it, and I don't have an answer to it. I'm just saying that is a question that's out in the
Yeah,
community.
but I think there are indicators. If you think about, we do collect the wastewater from the site, we do monitor that, we test that. And so the indicators would be if that wastewater had things that were popping up there as being a compound of concern, that would flag that, hey, something's happening in the waste mass. But we don't see that. We see very consistent non-detects, low concentrations over decades of monitoring.
Low concentrations of what materials?
It could be anything.
Metals.
Salts.
Yeah.
Heavy metals.
Yeah, that they meet the sewer discharge limits. So the limits are in parts per million, and we meet those parts per million discharge limits. So that's extremely low levels that are detected, if they are in fact detected. Most of the tests show us that most of the parameters, you can't even detect them by the chemical methods. So that in turn gives us confidence that the materials that are in the ash are not leaching out.
There was talk at one point about doing studies because they say that the toxins or the carcinogens that can be emitted previously through the air before the scrubbers or now may be present in the ash that can cause cancer, and that over long-term exposure it permeates through the lungs and into the fatty tissue and can be passed through mother's milk. So that's one of the things that the World Health Organization has posted on their website as well about exposure to dioxins. It also does reference that everyone has a certain amount of background toxin. It's in the environment, it's in the air, but there's certainly a big campaign as we become more aware of the environment and the damage that it can do to try to prevent the background dioxins that we're all exposed to every day, whether you live next to a plant or not. But if you do live close to something that's producing something that could have an elevated rate. I understand you pass all the tests, I'm not suggesting that you don't. All I'm saying is that when you live next to something for 40 years and you know that for perhaps the first 20 nothing was done because maybe you didn't know or for other reasons, and then it's sort of forced upon you to put the scrubbers in. And then there's this other studies that say, well, when you do that, it's great because we're breathing better air, but what about the ash? And then the ash is mixed with the other ash, and it's put in this place that's down the street from my house, and it rains and it snows, and does that exposure release anything? From a community standpoint, it's hard to really grasp the
Right, I fully
concept.
understand the worries and concerns. I live in North Andover, there's a plant in North Andover, I have these conversations at home all the time, right? So there's worries and concerns. There's exposure is kind of the key piece, right? So what path would there be exposure? It's not leaving the site through airborne means, it's not leaving the site through the groundwater. We have these protective systems in place. So that material is here, it's not leaving. There's not an exposure pathway from that material.
This could be causing cancer. You say that that's unfounded, but has there been testing to say, we have studied people in this area and we've taken samples from their tissue, or we've taken samples, and they don't have the level?
My answer, right, is based on exposure. We know we have permits that are designed to be protective of public health. We know that we operate within those permits. We're inspected by DEP. We're not exposing anybody to these ambient air levels that cause issues. That's what we know, that's what we can do. The Department of Public Health Community Assessment Program, that's the kind of study that they would do. So if they see data that indicates patterns of disease that would trigger the need for such a study, they would go forward and do that.
Would you be willing to participate if they were to do a study?
If the Department of Public Health did a study, of course we would participate.
Okay. If I understand correctly, you do an annual flyover to determine the available capacity. When the last flyover, I believe, was November 2014?
Yeah, typically we do it in November, the vegetation drops off.
And the prediction was that you would reach capacity in 2016, December.
So from
about a year and a half to 2 years?
2.5 to 3.5 years.
Oh, I read 1.5 to 2.
We're going to do another flyover this November. There's a lot of issues with settling. We have a big compost operation that we move around that takes up some volume. So it's not that precise that we can say, okay, it's going to we're going to reach on this date. There are some things.
So what are the plans when you reach capacity?
We're evaluating what we're going to do in the future. We're going to try and engage with the town to work out what the best options will be, and we're hoping to be able to propose something pretty soon.
Do you want to propose expanding it here? How?
Well, again, we're looking at a big, wide range of options, and we want to our first discussion we want to have is with the Board of Selectmen in the town.
Well, you know, the Board of Selectmen have already unanimously voted not to extend any current ash, and as did the Revere City Council, unanimously not to increase the ash. There's such a thing called environmental justice. Cities of Revere, Chelsea, Everett, Lynn, Saugus, not. We are all impacted by that, and I think the environmental justice piece plays certainly into this facility. As a resident, as a state representative, it's been 40 years that you've been in existence. All the other landfills that are unlined have been closed. We're the only one still in existence 40 years later. We keep hearing that Wheelabrator wants to expand, and I'm just wondering when Wheelabrator is going to say, okay, I think we've dumped enough ash into the marsh, and I think it's now time to put a cap on it.
We're all in the flood zone because we pay a lot of insurance to live in the flood zone. And it's just a concern that we have had some major storms over the last few years, and I know that you explained that you're over what's anticipated to be the 100-year floodplain. But I mean, obviously we all know that that's unpredictable. It's predictable to a point.
The Army Corps of Engineers has 140 years worth of data.
That's true. It's true. It's true. But things have been changing fairly rapidly. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yeah.
They're concerned. They're like, well, if there's a flood, where's all this going to go? And
where's all what?
Where's the ash?
The ash is going to go nowhere.
It's going to stay right there.
Right.
You guaranteed.
Yeah.
You're guaranteeing that.
Yeah.
It's just a concern. People live in the neighborhood. They're next to a plant that generates materials that they're concerned about.
There are people in Saugus and Revere who have health concerns, who feel that they're connected to our operation, right? And we certainly have sympathy with that. We don't operate a facility in a way that causes harm to people. DEP has regulations that were developed to protect public health and the environment. They've done rigorous review of our operation and told us in our permit that we operate in accordance with this permit. We're protective of human health and the environment.
Questions. I'm trying to get the answers for people that are asking.
We need to improve our communications with the community, and we recognize that. We're doing our best to do that. We're trying to organize more groups to come out here and see for themselves what we're doing. We're open to ideas as to how we can help give people in the community more confidence. I guess if we wanted to talk about designing some sort of testing program, we could talk about that.
Okay.
Figure out what the specific objectives of the test are, what methods we would use.
Just to confirm your results of the leaching.
Yeah, if you guys want.
And I think if I understand your very much with the past, and I wholeheartedly hope that that is also the case. But I think being able able to provide that sort of data to the community, me put
We'd definitely be open to talking about that, come up with what could be a reasonable scope to address. If we did get to testing, we would want to make sure it was done in a certified lab by approved DPA methods. That gives
That's
the
fair.
validity to the data. So sure,
I would agree that that's fair.
we can talk further and see what kind of program we develop.
Okay.
And again, framing the question that we want to answer will help us determine how to design a test board.
Okay.
First and foremost, the landfill closure. On the last meeting, mentioned to the board and who were here at the meeting, right, that the flyover is happening in November, and we'll do the final calculations there. After we do the calculations, we are going to look at the options and present it to the new senior leadership team that we have, and they will direct us.
The change in ownership, though, doesn't change the...
No, it doesn't change.
What we all agreed to.
No, it doesn't change anything. We still continue in the same vein, but we don't know what options they will look at.
Without getting yourself in any trouble, have you guys had any discussions?
No, I personally did not. We have to get that flyover done in November, because that will set the timeline.
The closure date is for December 2016, according to the 2014 Solid Waste Report. The selectmen have made their statement. Is there any discussion at all that you can give us?
There are a myriad of options here, right? Okay. So at this point in time, there are numerous items like, we can detail and everybody can know that. I cannot commit to anything here unless the senior leadership team direct me. This is the best option for the company and the people of Saugus.
The thing is this, and I understand that it's under discussion, but as you said, there are a lot of things on the table. Would you like to at least mention some of them?
I can say there were 6 or 7 different options that could happen with the landfill.
Could you give us 3 of them?
But you have to understand that I will get in trouble with people taking it and not really understanding what I'm saying.
We certainly don't want to put you in a difficult position. We're just trying to get as much information.
Yes, and I understand that. A couple of weeks ago, or a month or 2 ago, we wanted to start that discussion. No one wanted to.
Who's no one?
Well, the Board of Selectmen, we sent a letter to the Board of Selectmen.
Okay, have you petitioned them to get on their agenda, like we kind of advised you to last July?
Yeah, but we didn't want to do it like an open forum like that.
And I don't know if you're going to have...
What we have to do is take in your advice. I'll have to talk to the town manager and figure out the next steps.
I would say that it's probably going to be best for you guys and best for the town for you to appear before the Board of Selectmen and at least expand on some of these answers. Can you reach out to your senior leadership this week and ask what you can come up with?
Yeah, we should be presenting in the next couple of weeks to them.
Okay.
There are a lot of people interested and concerned, and we want some answers. That's what happens. You don't be a good neighbor and you don't discuss what's going on. You must always bear in mind, your premise has been for years and years, J. Raj. You want to work with the community and such, but this is not good when the communication shuts down.
When I came here, that is something that we are doing as a company. And personally, I did that with this town. And when I have that answer, it will be given to the Board of Health.
The readings were just so off the charts.
Well, not so off the chart, but it wasn't consistent.
But it was, right.
They were awesome. Well, they were abnormal.
We did our staff testing, one set of results. Did not go with our historical results were. So as we got the results, what we did, we rescheduled the staff testers and we redid the staff test. Within 2 weeks, the finalizing results will be given to the Board of Health, the DP, and the sustainable.
You said that they're going to be ready in about 2 weeks. Are you thinking October 1st?
No, it will be before that.
You think for sure it will be before that?
Most likely it will be next week, yeah.
Regarding the staff testing, just so that people can have an understanding at home as well as everybody here. There was standard testing in July, and that was the standard date that it usually is done. And during that time, one of the results came back over the limit. That test was the level for dioxin, which sends up a huge red flag for us. Since dioxins are directly related to cancers, we're concerned. You were concerned as well, so you called and notified Frank, the Board of Health in the town. And Joseph, you advised him, and he was fine for you to do a repeat test of that. What I can't understand, why are we not seeing the results?
So when it's fully QA/QC'd, right, we will have all the results together, right? right? And it will be submitted to all the relevant people.
Well, I have to say that I am disappointed. You have to understand, you go home in the evening, and you're not here. We're here. I see pretty much everything and hear everything. And so I'm concerned when there's a dioxin level that does not meet the state standards. We want the information, and we don't want to wait until you're good and ready to give it to us. We want the information properly.
As far as those dioxins, though, I mean, what would potentially cause such an increase in them? And again, the dioxins, is that a byproduct of a burning of a specific material? Is there always level and then they're filtered out?
There's always a small amount of dioxins in MSW. Let's measure this in nanograms. 10 to the power of minus 9 grams. Minuscule.
You can have nanograms of uranium that can cause serious illness.
We realize that they're tiny portions and percentages, but those are over, almost 40 years of being exposed to that. Not only here in Saugus, but in Revere, but in Lynn. This is a problem, and those little tiny levels add up over these years. And that is pretty plain and clear from the CDC levels that we've been getting, certain cancer levels above the average.
The fire was internal to the facility. One of the advice we give the employees, if you believe you cannot fight the fire, use the abundance of caution, call the fire department.
All of us get phone calls from concerned citizens, and to be honest, it's pretty embarrassing when somebody informs you of a fire at the plant.
We don't really want to see an email at this point. We'd like to obviously see a written follow-up. Welcome to our world. This isn't a new thing with the odor. This is an ongoing thing, and it's been going on for 40 years.
To the general public, they hear any substance cancer-causing causes a level of alarm.
Not an East Saugus concern, it's a town-wide concern, so we will take your comments under advisement. I don't think it's a bad idea at all.
We would like to thank all of you for watching Clearing the Air, our interview and tour of the Wheelabrator facility. We'd like to thank all the executives at Wheelabrator for participating in this video. We'd also like to extend our thanks to Alex Rittershaw, Ricky Serino, and of course State Representative Rosalie Vincent. For all of our updates, like our Facebook page, Clearing the Air Initiative.
We want to hear your thoughts, so feel free to email us at clearingtheair2015@gmail.com.
If you are interested in expressing your thoughts on the Wheelabrator ash landfill and the expansion of that, please join us on Thursday, October 8th at 1:00 p.m. at the Massachusetts State House in room 2A, as State Representative Rosalie Vincent will be presenting a public hearing in regards to her bill to stop the expansion of the Wheelabrator ash landfill in the Saugus-Rumney Marsh area.
Find alternatives. Let's stop the continued disposal of tons of ash from incineration into our community for your children, for future generations.